afternoon because, as always, we have a very special guest with us, and we're going to talk about some of the happenings here at the Marco Island Center for the Arts at 1010 Winterberry Drive on beautiful Marco Island. Our guest today is Paul Gower, and his work is in our in our Rush Gallery as a full exhibit there. Hi, Paul. How are you doing?
Good afternoon. How are you, Hyla? I'm doing very well.
Oh, I'm so glad. Now, Paul, can you talk a little bit and let our friends know what they can expect? We have put a piece of your work behind us, and I know you have some of your work behind you. Tell us a little bit about the pieces you chose, the process you used to make them, and sort of what was the inspiration there.
Well, a lot of the inspiration is the fact that I'm really very drawn to the drawn line. For me, there's a lot of intimacy in that, whether it's a heavy mark, because I use mixed media, predominantly what are considered drawing mediums, oil pastels, graphite, and charcoal to create my works. But my works are developed and created in layers of using heavy, aggressive line or actions to create certain marks with some of the materials, or to sit there and take my time and gently create delicate fine lines. A lot of my work is inspired with the human body as far as the organic shapes are concerned, and then in layering those up and then creating the organic, environment on the paper. I had taken printmaking in college back in the 70s, and so I consider paper my Achilles tendon, because I really do love the way these mediums act and react with the paper. Some of my works are created not only with just building up the lines and colors, but sometimes scraping stuff back with razor blades, the edges of a spoon, sometimes my fingernails, and sometimes layering some sgraffito into the pieces to help to develop in some of the textures that I end up with.
That is so interesting, and indeed the pieces are very complex, very dynamic, and pieces that you want to look at more and more as you observe what's there. They sort of are very engaging and draw you in. And, having heard, now how did you choose the pieces you chose? Because some seem to be more of a collection together and others seem to be perhaps of a different phase of work. How did you curate this for us?
I curated, well, the works begin. Those works that are on display now began actually back in 2018 when we moved down to Naples. We're now full-time residents in Naples, and at that time it was like I wanted to start to focus and develop my own imagery. There are some influences that tend to come into mind when I'm working, such as de Kooning, Twombly, Picasso, with a lot of his etchings and stuff like that. But the works all the works that were there were all created within the last 4.5 years. The Naples Series, which basically the title of the exhibition covers all of them because they've been done since I've moved down here. But the more black and white ones were the focus of the Naples Series, where I started to create works using the mediums that I do to express how I wanted to feel and how I wanted to work towards creating a new imagery for myself, as opposed to a lot of the more subdued stuff that I was doing prior to this, before moving down to Naples. So that the works were created and hung in the gallery to not only show those periods, but once COVID hit, I had been going through a dead zone, is one of the terms I've been hearing with regards to COVID. Unfortunately, it's a bad term, but it was a very non-productive period until it was like I need to start working. Some of the pieces that are out in the main gallery, the smaller pieces, were some of the beginning works where I was starting to now focus on color. And I tend to deal with color differently than I do the black and white. The color has its own voice to me, has its own abilities to express itself. With the black and whites, I tend to need to make it do or want it to do what I want it to do, if that doesn't
sense.
sound too dumb. So I'm able to manipulate differently, but the color work started to evolve in some of the smaller pieces, still having the line work and the circular motions that were a predominant part of the more organic forms of the black and whites. But these forms tend to be more atmospheric.
Yes.
With regards to the colors. And some of that work tends to, for me personally, I think of de Kooning and Cy Twombly a lot when I start to see the works, when I finally get to the finish point, saying it's not replicant of their works, but it's reminiscent of the styles that they use in the movement and motion of the colors that appear on the paper.
You can really see that sort of changing path or evolution from the work that is primarily black and white, that's very impactful, very gripping in a lot of ways, to what seems to lighten up in a bit when you started adding color and sort of the way the shapes and the lines changed a little. Why I asked, because it definitely seems like there are two different periods that we're looking at, or two different thought processes when you come in and look at the work through the gallery. Now, I want to talk to you a little bit, Paul, about your artistic journey and who you are as an artist. How did you get started as an artist?
Wow, I mean, most of us, there was a crayon or something on the floor, or either found a piece of wall that was empty or a piece of paper, and you just started doing that. Some of the earliest pieces that I can think of are like when my mom used to collect some of the stuff made in kindergarten, or some of the first grade or something like that. I mean, my parents were immigrants. I'm a first-born generation American, and they were blue-collar workers. They worked for a living. And I think my having an interest in art was something that they never discouraged, but it wasn't something that they gave a thought to. But they always put me in an arena, or it gave me an opportunity to really start doing some stuff. One of the pieces later on when I was in grade school that I remember was the fact that I had drawn a pine tree. We were doing plein air pieces in a summer class, and I'd done this detailed outline drawing in pencil of a pine tree. I didn't see it after that, even though I got into a student show at the end of the summer. Never saw it after that, because I think one of the teachers or one of the principals kind of put it in their office for perpetuity. But there was times over the years, high school didn't offer much for me as far as art education. But outside of that, I always made an effort to immerse myself one way or another into trying to look at art, understand art, et cetera, et cetera. 3.5 years of college, unfortunately no degrees, but there was 3.5 years of college where I focused on art and trying to get familiar with different disciplines.
So there was actually formal training during your college.
There was some formal training, yeah.
It's not purely self-taught. I mean, there are.
No, it's not
work
purely
with artists
self-taught.
who it's inside and they have taught themselves, and then there are artists who indeed have studied, continue to study. And I'm always curious people's journey and how they end up. So you got through college. When did you start? You're looking at your work and you're like, wow, I'm going to sell this. I'm going to exhibit this. What was the period of time where that started for you?
I think that was in the late 1990s, early 2000s. I've always wanted to, and I've always exhibited over the years in smaller local shows. I'm from upstate New York, Troy, Albany area. And whenever there was an opportunity to get a piece of work out there, I did so. I worked full time in other careers. The artwork was always something that was always still there, always in the back room, always in this, on the side of the bedroom or whatever, and was being created. And I had a huge, long, I'm going to call it a hiatus, really a long period of time where I wasn't creating any artwork for a long time. And then in the early 80s, I got into recovery. About 7 or 8 years later, I was diagnosed with an inflammatory bowel disease, and that's a major surgery as a result of that. And for a long period, like I said, for a long period of time, I was not doing it, creating any work. But at the time of the surgery, it was a major change in my life, and I said, do something or stop tormenting yourself. So I went ahead and started creating more work. That started out with working in ceramics.
Oh, really?
Because I needed that actual hands-on of working something that was a little more interactive with the viewer. And then it was shortly after that I had one of my first shows at in Greene County Community College in the Catskills. So from that, I started showing either in local shops. I was a director of one of the co-ops for the arts, or for the ceramic studio that I was working in. And then I became a vendor at a farmer's market in Cambridge, New York. And John and I were not only managing that, I was a vendor and selling my artwork for about 8 years doing that.
Wow.
And then I continued on after that, again, trying to exhibit and stuff like that. Coming down to Naples, having retired in Naples, retired full time. I started showing. Was present in the National in 2019 for Naples Art. I was accepted into the National Sarasota Open Call. I exhibited at the Government Center here in Collier County, and now with you guys down at Marco Island.
Wow. Well, you certainly have made the most of your time in retirement, and we obviously see a lot of people who have always had artistic inclinations, talents, are always working on their art, but working another job, and suddenly retirement frees them to have this new purpose. And I did not realize you had started out with clay, because of course we here at the Marco Island Center for the Arts have a very active clay program. It's really quite amazing, having grown probably tripled, if not more, just in my tenure here.
Yeah, when did you staring move? At the studio when I go by every time, keeping my periphery.
It is an amazing group of artists. They're people who started as a student, a beginner 5 years ago, is now selling their work online. They're now working professionally, and they really created this community together, and all of these artists are supporting each other and encouraging each other and inspiring each other. It's a pretty fabulous place in our play studio, as well as the other places.
Well, it's a very submersive. It's a very submersive medium, and that's really quite best way for me to put it.
When did you make that transition from working with clay, working with ceramics, to sort of this evolution of exploring line, exploring color? Because your work is very distinctive. It is very unique in the way that it presents itself. How did you suddenly decide? Because it's not like you said, "Oh, I'm going to pick up a set of paints, start painting in acrylic." I mean, you're using multiple medias and really exploring different ways to work with them to create something that you don't expect to see necessarily. I find a lot of surprise in your work when I look at it, and I want to look again and look deeper, because there's a lot going on. When did you make that transition to working in two-dimensional art?
Well, the two-dimensional art I had always been doing. Okay. And most of my art all my life has always been cyclical. When it got to the point where I got that the bug got the strongest, I would sit down and start working. So I would start working in cycles. So I was always drawing and always using some type of painting medium or drawing mediums. The clay work after that long hiatus, I got into that because for me, it was something I needed to literally have that physical hands on as opposed to just drawing. I mean, some of the works behind me, there's some smaller pieces. Those were works that I illustrated for a book I was commissioned to do. So working in line and pen and ink has always been there. The clay, working in the clay, forced me to start sketching more, to start sketching for the forms that I was working in the clay. And from the clay, with working with some of the glazes that we were working with, and particularly some of the raku glazes, allowed me to not have as much control over the final product because I could be, for lack of a better word, very anal about my surfaces on my clay, which sometimes I'm also very anal about my surfaces when I'm working on my drawings, my paintings. I started to need to utilize some color in the sketches, and somebody had suggested using crayons because they were cheap. They were the big, huge kids pastels, and I could really just do some very quick motions and movement with the sticks and get some color into some of my sketches. That then evolved into me now using finer oil pastels, a finer product, to understand more about how I could manipulate the color in the oil pastels. From the black and whites, such as the piece behind you that has not only, it's predominantly black and white, but there are large hits of color in the piece. You know, I would take the piece and just hit and tap it. That allows me to be able to have that color in there, but there's an energy or an action that takes place that puts it where it is. Most of my work is not thought out from the start. It's intuitive, it's random, and then I allow it to grow with how much more I'm inputting into it to get to the final piece. Not unlike a lot of other artists, you always have to find the place to stop. Sometimes you can stop and go back to it, but sometimes you just need to stop. It needs to have its point. My two-dimensional artwork in the past, and even today, compared to what my ceramics works were, two-dimensional artwork I consider somewhat to be voyeuristic. You know, because you're apart from it, you're watching it, you're looking at it. You know, it's not physical hands-on where the clay was, and the clay for the participant or the viewer is also hands-on. Clay works can be touched, handled, manipulated in that regards. So there's a more of a personal contact with a three-dimensional object, such as a piece of clay work, as opposed to a two-dimensional artwork. But I think from that three-dimensional piece, I'm still creating a field of depth in my works that will hopefully, again, in the black and whites, which is more organic and more a somewhat solid form, and then the atmospheric qualities in the color works.
Now, Paul, I know you've talked about some artists who obviously there's an influence, as you said, sort of work that brings to mind the artist. It's not derivative, it's a remembrance, I think was the word you used. But if I were to ask you who or what has been the greatest influence on you as an artist, who would that be? Or what would that be?
Well, I'm going to consider the people in my personal life right now as my partner, John. My parents, again, they were always supportive. As far as artists goes, Picasso was one of the first major influences for me as a major artist. and particularly with regards to his printmaking and the line work. There was always something about the quality and the amount of line that he would put, whether it be a lot or a little, to create the imagery that he would create. Beyond that, I mean, one of the first most influential exhibitions I ever saw was at MoMA, and that was an Ellsworth Kelly exhibition, where the simplicity color, but the color fields and the manner in which they manipulated the spaces in that. And then I have to look at also Francis Bacon. His works, and for me, the manner in which he breaks up the picture plane and creating not so much a huge depth, but enough depth in his paintings to bring you into them visually, and then for you to look at what images he's created within that plane. But he breaks those up in different ways, and how he creates the angles of, I'm going to call perspective, in his works. There's several other artists which do play a part.
There are always, as I said,
people.
I've asked this question, and there are people where simply the environment. Again, obviously, the people in your life who support you. It may be a teaching artist. Obviously, artists as a community are able to inspire each other, able to lift people up, able to make people think about their work differently. And that's part of what we love here at Marco Island Center for the Arts, because we are really here as a place to embrace artists, our local artists, sometimes artists from further afield, and we are always surprised and excited by what we have in our gallery. I want to thank you, Paul, for joining us. I want to let my friends out there know that there is a lot of variety right now in our galleries. In our Lauritsen Gallery, which is the first that you walk into, our slightly larger gallery, we have several watercolor artists whose work is on display. Some of them are teaching artists like Diane Reed Eiler, Edith Newborn. Their work is quite lovely. We're excited. Hannah Einison, another one of our instructors. The watercolor is beautiful. It's sometimes a difficult medium, and they explore it in very different ways. And of course, as you move on, Paul has his exhibition, which we've discussed, and then our final exhibition is our littlest artists. These were preschoolers from St. Mark's Preschool who were tasked with creating artwork about their favorite book. And early childhood literacy being something that we really want to support, and knowing that visual arts can be a tool in helping children in those early years. So this is a charming and whimsical exhibition. My favorite pieces, I think, have to do with The Hungry Caterpillar by Eric Carr. So I encourage you all, it's summer, but come on down to Marco Island Center for the Arts, open 9 to 4. We also have our beautiful gift gallery. If the building seems a little more hectic than it might otherwise, that's because our children and youth programs are taking place, and it's our best year ever, and we are so excited to see what these young people are creating. So we welcome you. Paul, I want to thank you again. And to my friends out there, you know that when you come and see us, or when you join us here in the virtual world, when you become part of our world, you cross our threshold, you become part of our art family. And we are working every day in every way to be your art home. Take care, everybody. Till next time.
Great. And I want to thank Marco Island Center for the Arts for having me there.
Well, we are the ones to thank you, because it is beautiful on our walls. And you, come on down and see us. Bye-bye, everybody.
Take care. Thank you, everybody.